Welcome. This is an overview of the April 27th, 2011 super outbreak. This is kind of an update. I made a video a little while ago doing pretty much the same thing, but I changed up a couple things, and I want to make an improvement on that. So on April 27, 2011, we had what was called a super outbreak, or a generational tornado outbreak, which is somewhat a 1 in 40, 1 in 30 type year of, or 1 in 30 year type event. This was our generational tornado outbreak. You can see the Storm Prediction Center, day one, issued a high risk over portions of eastern Mississippi, northern Alabama, and far southeastern and south central Tennessee. In their afternoon update, they issued that 45% tornado probability. So that's 45% of a tornado touching down within 25 miles of any given point within that 45%. And they also issued that hatched region all the way up into central Kentucky and all the way down into southern Alabama and southern Mississippi. This was their probabilistic damaging wind graphic, and you can see they also issued a hatched region over much of northern Alabama, eastern Mississippi, central Tennessee, and Kentucky. And here's their hail graphic, and you can see significant hail was also issued over a large portion of that region. They did say in their wording a major tornado outbreak was expected, and that's pretty much exactly what we got. Here's a look at our storm reports for April 27th, 2011, and you can see over 292 tornado reports, 438 wind reports, and 207 hail reports, so a total of 937 reports. And you can see this large swath right here, all the way up into New York. We had tornado reports, so this was a very, very large-scale event. Taking a look at our mesoscale stuff, here's a look at our mid-level winds. This is at 500 millibars. This is our storm system that we were dealing with on that day. You can see this is our low, and as it pushes off, it begins to deepen. And this is around, I believe, 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And you can see there's our low over southeastern Missouri. And this is where we're getting our storms firing up on that southeastern edge of that dip in the jet stream, or that trough. And by the peak of the event, you can see that jet streak just gained even more strength over that region. And that is what provided that lift and that volatile atmosphere as it sucked moisture out of the Gulf. And we had a very unstable atmosphere in here. We had about 3,000 to 4,000 joules per kilogram of energy, or CAPE, in this region, which is an extremely juicy atmosphere. Here's a look at our storm relative helicity, 0 to 3 kilometer. And you really only need about 250 to get strong tornadoes. But on this day, you can see we had values up to 1,200 in this area, but mainly around 600 to 700 where those strong tornadoes were touching down. But that's just extreme spin and vorticity in the atmosphere. Now look at our composite index. This is our significant tornado parameter, and we were just seeing numbers off the charts. You can see around 13, I believe, 12 or 13 in that area. That's where initiation happened out there in western Tennessee and central Tennessee. As we go off into Alabama, you can see it maintains numbers just off the charts as we go off to the east. And yeah, it just maintains its strength all the way through. Here's a look at our storm tracks, and this is mainly just over Alabama. For some reason, it doesn't include Mississippi, but Alabama and Georgia. And if we zoom in and take a look, so you can see these are all the tracks of these tornadoes. You had several tornadoes that tracked over 50 miles. There's another tornado track. Here's another one. This is the one that went through Tuscaloosa. This is the one that went through Centerville. And you can see these are all individual tornadoes. And we had even more over here in Mississippi. And even just all of these are just individual supercell tracks. And we had 4 EF5s and 11 EF4s on this day. Now keep in mind, most years we only have typically under 5 violent tornadoes, which is those EF4s and those EF5s. On this day, we had 15, and that's usually triple the amount you get in a single year, and this was just on a single day. So that really puts into perspective how volatile and how deadly this day was. And the atmosphere was just absolutely incredible. Everything came together perfectly. So now I want to push off into the radar analysis, but first I actually want to see if we can take a look at the tornado watch, because I forgot to add that in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the tornado watch. I believe here it is. And here was the tornado watch issued on that day. You can see we have our parameters and our likelihoods all maxed out here. High for every category. So they were really anticipating a major event. So a great call by the Storm Prediction Center. You can see it was over that large area. Here was where the initiation happened. That was our boundary, and storms just formed off of it. It looks like you also had a prefrontal boundary as well. And destructive tornadoes, large hail up to 4 inches in diameter, which is very large hail, was anticipated. A classic tornado outbreak situation is developing across Alabama as discrete tornadic supercells form. Strong low-level and deep layer vertical shear combined with the moist and moderately unstable air will pose a dangerous risk for strong and potentially violent long-track tornadoes. Let's take a look at our probabilities here. And you can see every category has above a 95% chance. And actually, last week we got this same tornado probabilities. That was only the 3rd time in history, and I believe it was only the 3rd time in history. And you can just see everything is maxed out with these probabilities. So just an absolutely incredible day. Let's take a look at our first. This was in the morning hours, so we had a morning squall line, a morning line of thunderstorms that produced plenty of strong tornadoes along this line. And we'll take a look at this. So this is in the morning hours. We had a couple confirmed tornadoes out here in northwest Alabama and western Mississippi, even out in central Mississippi. But we're really going to take a look at these storms that come into Tuscaloosa County. And you can see if we take a look at our velocity, right out here north of Elrod and north of, let's see, this is north of U.S. Highway 82, east of Gordo. You can see this was a strong rotation beginning to develop as it moved up towards Samantha, and this was north of Tuscaloosa. The Tuscaloosa County just got nailed by these tornadoes that day. And you can see this was a magnitude of 3, so an F3 tornado, an EF3. And it had peak winds of 140 miles an hour, according to the National Weather Service's damage survey. And you can see this thing continued to push off to the north and east. And this went through Samantha as well as it crossed over State Route 13 right in town. And this continued to push off to the northeast. We also had another tornado touch down in Barry. And Barry got hit twice this day, the town of Barry. This was an EF1. With peak wind speeds of 100 miles an hour, as you can see from that storm report. Relatively broad rotation, but definitely probably had some mesovortices under that. And then as we go on, you can see another strong tornado begins to develop, and this is north of the Tuscaloosa area. And this is developing out near Gorgas. And this was a strong rotation. And even if we get a storm track on this, we can get that storm relative velocity. And if we take a look at this, that is where it develops right along State Route 69. As it goes up to the northeast near Gorgas, it continues to get stronger and stronger. This might have been the peak velocity scan. And we can see around 108 knots delta velocity. This is 58 on top of 67. So probably roughly around 125 mile an hour gate-to-gate shear with this storm. And this was just with the morning storm. Here's our storm report. They said an EF3 possibly higher. So the National Weather Service was indicating that they think this may have been a violent tornado just with this morning storm. It was 300 yards wide, which is more than a football field wide in diameter, and it had peak winds of 140 miles an hour. This also went up into the Oakman Parish, Cordova area, which got slammed by an EF4 later that day. So it just, I think there was a parallel path. It kind of paralleled where the Cordova tornado touched down later in the day. I think it may have actually went right over the track because downtown Cordova took a hit later in the day. But here's that velocity scan once again. And if we take a look at our base reflectivity, there it is. And you can visually see where that tornado is. That is our actual debris ball right here. And it was probably eating trees. Unfortunately, we don't have the product correlation coefficient at this time. We got it later on down the line in 2013. But it would have been a very nice product to have during this event. Again, these storms continue to track off. We have more mesovortices forming along this line. You can see they issued a huge tornado warning for that Birmingham area, and just an incredible line of storms went through in the morning hours. There's some more embedded rotations as we push off. Again, it looks like another tornado developed near Warrior. So we're going to pull up the next scans. Here we are. Yep, and there is that latest scan for that Warrior storm. And there's that rotation near Warrior. And I believe this did put down a tornado in Warrior, correct? Yeah. So this was an EF2 tornado that went through Warrior, Alabama. The track was 3.2 miles long, 200 yards wide. So that's the size of a football field in diameter. And you had between 125 and 135 mile an hour winds with this. We also had another EF2 touchdown in Cahaba Heights. This is north of the Birmingham area, very populated area. And there is our area of rotation right there. If we take it to reflectivity, the tornado would be embedded right in this area. This is east of Vestivia Hills. This area got hit pretty hard. I remember seeing damage photos. And this vortice continued to move off to the northeast, off towards Leeds. And we also had some more tornadoes, I believe, up near the Good Hope area. I know Holly Pond also took a direct hit as well with these morning round of storms. And that's Holly Pond right there. Yeah, so there was that tornado in Holly Pond. As it strengthened, there's our velocity couplet, and that is where that tornado touched down in Holly Pond. We also had a tornado touchdown near Branchville. This was an EF2. So if I actually look right here, that is our tornado near Branchville and Odenville in the morning. Taking a look, up to 125 or 120 mile an hour winds, also 200 yards wide. So these were some wide tornadoes. This was the size of a football field as well, and a 3.9 mile long path. As we go on, you can see some more tornadoes touch down in the northern part of the state near Guntersville. Hard to see from here, but it looks like we can also see the rotation right in there. And if we just take a look at this, we'll just do a little loop of these storms as they moved off, and just a very impressive storms. And they cleared out, and there was another little round. Didn't produce much. I think it may have had a tornado or two. And then the atmosphere cleared for the afternoon rounds. So we're going to take a look at the afternoon rounds. Just have to find it. And here's the afternoon round. So this is our supercellular mode. This was the afternoon round of supercells. This was the deadliest part of the outbreak. The morning hours were very, very significant. You had more strong tornadoes than you see in most events with that morning MCS or mesoscale convective system, or sorry, that QLCS, quasi-linear convective system. And here's the supercell. This was the first one of the day, and this was the one that produced in Coleman. And here it is on reflectivity. We'll go ahead and show you that as it moves up towards Coleman. This is where that rotation really begins to develop southwest of the city. And this was really, really well known because James Spann had that tower cam on it as it came through the city of Coleman. You see, as it gets through that city to the city of Coleman, we have that bewar and that donut hole beginning to form, and that's very indicative of an extremely strong updraft on a storm. And typically, it's associated with tornadoes as well. As it enters the city of Coleman, and it's about to cross over the U.S. Highway 278 and I-65 in downtown Coleman. This went directly through downtown. You can definitely see as it goes through downtown, it has that extreme hook echo on it right there. And all of these storms during this day had extreme hook echoes on it as well. And you can see it's definitely exhibiting an impressive signature. And this was kind of these prefrontal round of cells. And again, as it pushed off towards Arab, that is where it did EF4 damage over here in Arab. In downtown Coleman, we had EF3, high-end EF3 damage, but it did not produce EF4 damage until it pushed off towards Arab. Again, we had some more cells. These were the other cells that developed out in Phil Campbell and Smithville. And we'll go over those here in a second, but we're going to take a look at the velocity signature for this cell out here in Coleman as it moved off. Taking a look, we're going to get the storm relative velocity on this. And that's when that rotation really began to develop. And you can see it. Here it is. This was when it was southwest of the city, and I believe it was just dancing around out there in those trees. But there's our rotation. As it moved off towards Coleman, you can see this thing is really starting to get developed west of Good Hope and southwest of the city. As it goes off, this is where our tornado touched down. This is where it first touched down and really started doing incredible damage. This was just southwest of downtown Coleman, and that is your couplet. And I'm going to try and make this as detailed as possible, so I actually want to show you a 3D image of this storm. And you can barely see it, but this is our tornado right here on 3D. And this storm was a very, very impressive storm. It was not a large tornado. This Coleman tornado was a multi-vortex, kind of almost like a drill bit. And it was a long tracker as well. And as it goes right into the city, you can see those velocity couplets really, really tighten up. Or the velocity couplet, I'm sorry, really tightens up right as it's about to track over I-65 into downtown Coleman. This hit the the Coleman courthouse, the city courthouse down there in Coleman. And the velocity as it went over the city got really contaminated, but they were very, very strong. As it pushes off towards the Arab area, there is that rotation once again, and it does track off towards Fairview and Baileyton. Again, there is our really impressive rotation right there over Fairview. I believe it was still at high-end EF3 damage at this point. There's a look at it on the base velocity. The storm relative velocity really gives us an idea of what we're looking at. And again, it continues to strengthen as it goes off into Arab. And as it reached Arab, you can see this inflow really started to ramp up, and this thing turned into a wedge tornado just west of the city of Arab. And here's where it kind of goes out of radar range. And we have to go and look back. New cells start to develop, and these eventually produce violent tornadoes as well. And look at the echo tops. You can see all these high-topped supercells. They were all reaching about 50,000 feet in the air with their tops, so higher than where planes normally fly. So these things were reaching really, really high. And this is the point when the cell near Gordo and Reform. This was the Barry Oakman Parish Cordova EF4, and this is where it touched down. You can see a long track tornado started northeast of Pickensville. This was a half a mile wide swath of EF3 damage noted in downtown Cordova, and I'm not sure exactly where the EF4 indicator was, but there was a couple. And I think this tracked about 70 miles, if I remember correctly. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the next scans. There's that rotation as it's going into Reform, right in here. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to take a look at the base reflectivity as this moves off. And you can see that hook echo begins to develop. And there is when our visible debris ball shows up on radar west of Moore's Bridge. And this moves off towards Barry. And you can see this is following a very similar path to what that storm in the morning followed as it went through Samantha. So this area got absolutely slammed. And this is about as textbook as a supercell as you'll ever see. Just an extreme hook echo right there. Very, very clear. And this was a wide tornado as well. And as we continue to go off towards Cordova, this thing continues to strengthen. And this went through downtown Parrish, I believe, as well, south of Oakman. And there's our debris ball forming right back up there on radar, or on reflectivity, I'm sorry. And that's very indicative of a strong tornado, especially when you see something like this. Now let's take a look at this. And one thing we can really see, and I really love about this 3D image product, is we can actually take a look at the 3D image of the storm and see the tornado right there, which is really cool thing we can do with this product. And if we take that forward again, you can still see that tornado on the ground. It starts to fade a little bit, but I think we can see it on the ground for a scan earlier as well. Yeah, and there's an even better look at it. So right there, we're taking a look, and there is our tornado. So a really cool look into the 3D action of that storm. Now as we continue to go off towards Cordova, this thing looks like it weakens a bit, and then it re-strengthens as it goes towards Sipsey and Arkadelphia. This thing makes a northern turn and heads right towards Arkadelphia, and I believe it lifts right around there. And if we go back off to the west, we're going to take a look. Actually, let's take a look at our velocities real quick with this storm, for those of you who are interested. And this is where that velocity really began to ramp up near Moore's Bridge. And as we go off, this is right around where it begins to really intensify near Barry. And this is north of Samantha where that morning storm went through. So we push off. Actually, let's go ahead and take a gate-to-gate here. So around 218 knots delta velocity. So that's 120 on top of 132. So 252 mile-an-hour gate-to-gate shear. So very impressive as it moved off towards Oakman. And this was as it was reaching Oakman and Parrish. You can see, again, still a very impressive velocity signature. And this is where it widened out a bit as it moved towards the Cordova area. And it was just a large tornado at this point. There's your velocities again. And you can see it intensified once more right as it went over downtown Cordova. And this pretty much engulfed the city of Cordova. As it went off towards Sipsey, again, you can still see the velocities are very strong. And this is in its dying stages. This is where it begins to weaken. Or not weaken, but this is where it begins to wrap itself up. But you can see it is still incredibly intense just east of the town of Sipsey. And as it goes into Arkadelphia. And then it lifts after that somewhat 70 mile. I believe it was above 70 mile and over 70 miles that it tracked. Now taking a look, this is a look at the most infamous cell, I'd say, and this was the Tuscaloosa cell. Again, James Spann covered this, absolutely incredible coverage. And if you haven't watched his coverage already, go ahead and check it out on YouTube. Just look up April 27, 2011 coverage, and it'll come up, ABC 3340. He did an amazing job, and you could literally see this thing track right over downtown Tuscaloosa. This is a look at our reflectivity. You can see this cell begins to start to exhibit that hook echo right as it comes into downtown Tuscaloosa. And I believe it touched down right around here, right before it entered the city. If you look at our road map, you can see this is just an incredibly populated area down there in downtown Tuscaloosa. Right as it goes into the city, you can see that debris balls start to develop on this cell. Now, if we take a look at 3D, we might be able to actually see inside this cell and see that tornado. And there it is. There it is on 3D. You can see that large tornado right over Tuscaloosa, and that's actually pretty accurate as to what it looked like in real life. Now, if you go on another scan, that is when it becomes a wedge, and there is our wedge tornado. as depicted on this 3D model. As we continue to go off, it becomes a little less clear. But there's a look at our 3D. And you can see that debris ball really deepens as it goes, after it goes through downtown Tuscaloosa, and it's just tearing up homes. Now, this thing was rated a high-end EF4 at 190 miles an hour, but it actually did do EF5 damage to an apartment. They just deemed it inconclusive. You see that debris ball continues to deepen as it tracks off towards the downtown Birmingham area. And let's go ahead and take a look at this velocity as it tracks into Tuscaloosa. So that's right as it's touching down. And as it enters Tuscaloosa, this velocity really intensifies. And as we go off to the next scan, this is when it's its deepest, or when it's most impressive. And this is actually one of the most impressive velocity scans you'll get out of any tornado you'll ever witness. You can see 249 knot delta velocity, negative 161 on top of 126. So that's almost 290 mile an hour gate-to-gate shear on this tornado. Definitely one of the most intense tornadoes of the decade. There's no doubt about it. This thing continues to track off to the northeast. As it goes into North Johns, you can see it re-intensifies, and it continues to go. And at this point, it's very rain-wrapped as it heads into Hueytown. And it also did EF4 damage in Pleasant Grove, which we'll see here in a second. I'm going to take us back on over. There we go. And this is where it is in Pleasant Grove. And it did high-end EF4 damage there. Continues to track off. And what I'm actually going to do is double panel this now. And we can see our tornado. This goes into Fultondale as well. Still on the ground. This was still doing high-end EF3 damage. Goes right through Fultondale where we had that tornado earlier this year. And then it diminishes. Now, if we look back to our west, here is that tornado. And this one touched down near Forkland and traveled along Sawyerville. This traveled along a very similar path as the one that we had last week. North of Greensboro, you can see. Let's go ahead and actually, what I'm going to do for this one is take this off and get that storm relative velocity. The hook echo begins to deepen as this travels off, and this, I believe, goes right through Centerville, or maybe northwest of Centerville. Still very deep. If we take the storm motion from marker, we can see this on storm relative velocity. That gives us a much better look into that storm. And very intense velocity signature with this thing as it moves off to the east towards Eoline. And you can see it continues to deepen. Here's a gate-to-gate shear. We have 152 knots of delta velocity. That's 90 on top of 86, so around 160 mile an hour gate-to-gate shear, I believe, or 170 mile an hour gate-to-gate shear, my bad. And this continues to go off, and this was a long tracker as well. You see this thing is still on the ground and strong as it goes off towards the West Blockton area. And this is where it begins to sort of die out. You can see it's still intense as it moves off towards Marvel. And that is where it really weakens. And a look up here, that is where this Tuscaloosa cell begins to cycle. And this put down an EF4 north of Ragland. And you can see this is our velocity over here, and this is our reflectivity. There's that debris ball as it shows up. This is north of Ahatchee. This is similar. This also took a similar track to one of those cells we had last week on Thursday. This went into Glencoe, and this at this point I believe it was where it was producing EF4 damage north of Wellington and Glencoe. There's our debris ball and reflectivity. If we take a 3D of this image, we might actually be able to see this tornado. Yep, there it is. There is our tornado. There's that EF4, and just a very impressive look. And you see most of these had such clear debris balls and such clear tornadoes on 3D because of how classic supercellular they were. And again, there is a look at that velocity. We can actually take a gate-to-gate. 153 knot delta velocity. That's 79 on top of 97, so around 160 mile an hour gate-to-gate shear, but still a very intense tornado as we moved off towards the Piedmont area. And again, it intensified, and I believe this is where it did its most intense damage, is north of Piedmont. And this is where it goes out of range of the radar, but you can see it still continues off towards Forney. And this is where our cells begin to develop down here, and another EF4 is in the making. Go ahead and pull up our... There we are. And so this is where the next EF4, you can see another round of cells begins to develop out here. We also have another tornado develop, I believe, near Vincent and Harpersville. Yeah, there we go, an EF1. So one of the rather weaker tornadoes of the day up in that area. But this is our Lake Martin EF4. You can see another classic supercell look to this storm. Let's go ahead and bring that into double panel as well. And here we go, another scan, and this thing really intensifies. Again, another hook echo beginning to form in a strong velocity. This was only rated 170 mile an hour, so it was a low-end EF4, but still another EF4 on this day. There's our debris ball on reflectivity, and I believe this is where it inflicted its most impressive damage. And we go off again. There it is. Again, we can try and take a look at the 3D and see if we can see the tornado on this. And again, yeah, look at that, and it's not very visible, so we'll continue to go off. And as it goes off towards Dadyville, there's that signature, that velocity signature, and that deepening debris ball. And it continues to track off. And again, it's still very, very intense, as we can see from that debris ball on reflectivity. And this thing tracked a long ways as well. This was a very wide tornado. We take a look at this. 9 people died from this. It moved through Dexter, producing EF2 damage, intensified to EF3 as it moved through a mobile home park, and it then intensified to an EF4 eventually. And then these storms moved off into Georgia, producing more intense tornadoes. Now, that was the last of the intense tornadoes in Alabama that day. So now we're going to take a look. Now, this was back over here. We're going to take a look at this storm near Philadelphia. And this was an EF5. This was the first, I believe this was the first EF5 of the day. This is where these cells began to form. And you can see this thing really puts off that beam shape to it. And as we go off, we can get that storm motion from marker, and there's that storm relative velocity. And this is where it goes tornado emergency. The tornado has not touched down yet, but this moves right through Philadelphia, and this is known for actually digging a 2-meter trench into the ground and ripping up asphalt out of the ground. So this was a really, really intense tornado. And Reed Timmer was actually on this, and it's shown in his Storm Chasers episode of this day. And this is where this velocity you can see this huge velocity couplet beginning to develop, this huge mesocyclone. And this is where it really, really begins to intensify. Yeah, and there's a look at our velocity as it goes through Philadelphia. I believe it is on the ground at this point. This is where it touches down. And the next scan is really where it deepens. I'm not sure why it's at an EF4 with this, because this was actually an EF5. But yeah, this was actually an EF5. The storm report says EF4 for some reason. But then again, there's another look. There's our hook echo. As we go off, there is that velocity signature. So we'll just take a look at it. Right now it only shows about 130 knot delta velocity, but it was much stronger than that on the ground. And then we start to see this cell go off towards the Macon, Mississippi area, and this put down another intense tornado. I believe it was an EF3 in Macon. And here's another cell to the south that went tornado emergency as it went into DeKalb. And there's a look at that velocity. Very, very intense. As these cells track off, and the more intense ones are up to the north, again, here's a look at this storm. There was a tornado near Vaden as well. 10 homes damaged. This one was one of the weaker ones of the day. And then we take a look back south, and there's some more cells beginning to develop. You can just see cell after cell blowing up off of this boundary and continues to produce strong tornadoes throughout the day. And we watch this thing tighten up, and I believe this is an EF2 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, an EF2 with 115 mile an hour winds. There's our velocity couplet. Although small, this thing on the ground was rather impressive. And you can see that hook echo right there as well, located with that. And this cell produces plenty of strong tornadoes throughout the day. And we're going to go off to our next one. There we are. And looking at this, this is where this DeKalb storm really develops a Buer as it moves into DeKalb. Yeah, there we go. There's a look at it. And I believe this thing dropped an EF3 tornado maybe as it went through Scuba. And we'll really get a better look at that whenever we look at this radar here in a minute. But going back off down here, this is a look at our EF2 tornado. We'll continue to track this one. And this thing goes through a little while without producing a tornado. Some more cells begin to develop. And I believe these are the ones responsible for the Centerville EF3. Yeah, those are the cells that blow up and produce that Centerville storm. But look, as this thing passes the radar, you really start to see a hook echo develop. And this looks like another classic supercell. And there is when it really tightens up and puts down. This is an EF3. This had, let's see. Doesn't tell us the wind speed. Oh, 130 mile an hour wind speeds with this thing. There's that velocity couplet right there. And now we see a defined hook echo associated with that velocity. And we'll actually take a look, see if we can do this thing in 3D. And see the tornado. Yeah, there we go. You can literally see a rope tornado on the ground with this thing. And that's actually one of the more impressive 3D images I've ever seen on this thing. And literally clear as day, there is your tornado coming out of the storm via 3D. An incredible look at that. We'll continue to show you that panning around. That last scan, you can start to see it come out of the sky, and with that new scan, boom, it's on the ground. And there it is. It looks like it's still there. As we go off to the next scan. Now let's take you off again. You can see it's still deep right there. Still impressive. As we go on, we also have a new cell develop out there to the southwest. And this is where that storm begins to kick up again. Now we'll take you over to, again, the next scans. Look at the next scan. It's out there near Newton. And here's that new velocity signature. Let's go ahead and get that storm relative velocity real quick for you guys. And let's take this dual panel as well. And now looking at this. By the way, this was another EF3. This one was almost an EF4. There's 145 mile an hour winds on this thing. There's that donut hole, that classic donut hole that's indicative of a strong updraft once again. This moves off to the east, and there's our velocity signature. Very, very impressive velocity signature located west of Hickory, and you can see several houses were damaged, and significant tree damage was associated with this as well. As this goes off, you can see our cells to the south are beginning to intensify as well. And that cell weakens. And this is where another EF4 tornado touched down. 175 mile an hour winds, 6 fatalities, and 35 injuries with this thing. well-built homes were completely demolished. There's our velocity signature with this thing. As we go forth, you can see this really intensifies with that latest scan. If I put that dot over, you can see right where that is. There's our velocities associated. And again, it intensifies once more as this moves towards Montrose, and you can really see why this was an EF4, really intense couplet. Now, if I take a slice into this 3D, we might be able to see this. Yeah, very clear as day. So there is our tornado, right there. This is our EF4. As we track off, it's still very visible right there. That is our tornado. And again, once more, we track off, and it's still down. And that is where it turns again. It looks like maybe a wedge beginning to form. But as we go off to the newest scan, that is where we see our clear as day debris ball. This is where I believe it was at its most intense, right over Montrose. 136 knot delta velocity, that's 61 mile an hour on top of 95, so around 150 knot or mile per hour gate to gate shear. So incredible stuff. Again, you can see this thing is still on the ground. This was the storm moving off towards Enterprise, and you can see it continues off. There's still impressive velocity signature with that. And it continues off, and it lifts. And it briefly lifts and then begins to intensify as it moves through Enterprise. Now we had another EF4 go through Enterprise. So this thing recycled again. There's your classic donut hole. And there are those velocities over there in Enterprise. You can see these things really ramp up. Newest scan, and this is where it's really intense. And this thing was another wedge. 145 knot delta velocity. That's 54 on top of 82. So around 140 knot gate-to-gate shear. Keep in mind this is very far from the radar, so it's not picking up every ounce of velocity it can. Still very evident that's where your tornado is on reflectivity. This thing continues to go off, and this is where we really lose track of it, but I believe it went out through Snell. You see another cell begins to develop out south there. Now taking a look, let's go up here to... Here we go. Now this is where we had two EF5s. We had an EF5 in Phil Campbell and Hackleburg, as well as in Smithville. So we'll take this 2-panel, take this storm relative velocity, and this is where we have our cells really start to blow up. You can see cell after cell producing intense rotation. Out here, here's some intense rotation over there near Springville. Another cell develops out south, and there's one up here north as well. These things are really incredible as they track off. And if this was today's radar, you can see this radar. We'll actually smooth this one out to make it look a little bit better. You can see a strong tornado develops southwest of Sherman. There's our velocity couplet right there, a classic bean shape to it. You can see some cells are going up to the north, and there's your velocity couplet in Sherman. Surprising, this was only an EF0 tornado, but you can see a very intense velocity couplet associated with this thing. And this is where an intense tornado touched down near Houston. You can see 7 fatal, 150 mile an hour winds with this thing. There is your tornado. You can see that clear debris ball on reflectivity. Now we might actually, if we take this thing and we get a storm relative velocity on this, we might actually be able to see this on, let's take a look at this. We might actually be able to see this on 3D as it gets that debris ball. So, taking a look at 3D, and there we are. There's our tornado. Clear as day. You can see it down here extending from the clouds to the ground. There's the top of our storms up here. And let's see if this thing continues to go off to the east. Again, yep, there's our tornado. Very obvious cone. And then let's go on back to our radar. See, this thing continues to intensify as it's off towards Egypt. There's our velocity couplet. Very intense rotation associated with this thing as it moves off towards Okolona. This thing was a wedge, I believe, as well. Tornado on the ground. Yep, south, right there. Continues to intensify near Bigby. Four fatalities reported right there with that. And this is when it begins to lift and put down the Smithville EF5. First, let's go ahead and check on this Phil Campbell storm in Hackleburg. There's a look at that. Just incredible view of this storm. And that is where it went through downtown Hackleburg, and you can literally see that debris ball clear as day. Let's take this into 3D. And there's your large tornado right there. And I believe as this tracks off, we can still see it. Yeah, there it is again as it goes off towards Phil Campbell. One more scan, and you can still see it over there. Let's take this off and go on up. And as it goes off, this is northeast of Phil Campbell. This is when we really get to see the velocities. This thing had, I believe, 150 mile an hour or 150 mile track. There's still our tornado. You can see it on reflectivity. That dot right there, that is our tornado. And if we look out here, this is when our Smithville EF5 begins to develop. We have 14 fatalities. And this thing was known for being, some people refer to it as the most intense EF5 of all time, or the most intense tornado of all time, because this thing literally in 25 seconds it was producing EF5 tornado, an EF5 tornado. This thing went from literally touching down to an EF5 tornado in a matter of seconds. We take a look back at this thing. Let's go dual panel. So let's go ahead and look at this. This is when it went through Smithville. And this is when it's at EF5 intensity. You can see that velocity couplet is really, really intense. If we take a look at our gate-to-gate shear, this thing won't really tell you how intense this was on the ground. It was a wedge. But 88 mile an hour, or 88 knot delta velocity, which is really not, this thing was a 205 mile an hour wedge. So that's really not indicative of what it looked like. But let's get a storm relative velocity on this thing so we can show you that 3D. Yeah, there we go. There's a look at those velocities. And let's take a 3D cut of this thing. And you can see there is your tornado. Clear as day on that 3D. And this was a really, really cool feature that this program offers. This is GR2 Analyst. And you can see that tornado is still on the ground as it moves off to the east. This thing continues and continues. That Phil Campbell storm still on the ground up there, and we'll actually get a better look at that whenever we go off to another radar site. There's a look at that other tornado. And as this thing goes off to the east, we have another intense tornado touch down near Beaverton. This is an EF3. And there is that debris ball and that rotation associated with it. You can see right there. And there is that debris ball. Now, we can actually try and pull this one into this thing, I believe, went through downtown Haleyville. You can see still very impressive. Let's see if we can find that thing on 3D. Yep, there is that wedge shape to it. You can see that wedge tornado right there. And as we go off to the east, still very, very much there. And we continue off. There it went through downtown Haleyville and it produced high-end EF3 damage. And that is the last of that one. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some more intense tornadoes. So this was earlier on in the day. This is a look at the morning storms, and this thing went through the Trenton area, I believe. Let's go ahead and dual panel this again. And this is a really in-depth breakdown of these storms. So this thing may go on for a while. We're already at 50 minutes. But this is really trying to be in-depth. And this thing goes out towards the Lookout Mountain area. And we did have a tornado associated with that, I believe. And this touchdown, or went just east of the Chattanooga area. A funnel cloud was reported. This is where we had reported tornadoes in the morning with those rain showers. A tornado reported on the ground, but I'm not sure if that actually got reported. Now on this radar, we can take a look at, this is the Coleman cell as well, but we're going to see what it looked like as it went into Arab. So here's a look at that Coleman cell. This is when it was doing EF4 damage northwest of Arab. You can see that real intense velocity couplet right there. And there is that debris ball on reflectivity. We can get a gate-to-gate shear of this thing. 153 knot delta velocity. That's 77 mile per hour on top of 100. So 177 gate-to-gate shear. This thing was a wedge as well. We'll take a 3D cut of this again. See if we can see that on 3D. And yep, clear as day again. You can pretty much see everything on 3D during this day. There is that tornado northwest of Arab. This is where it was doing EF4 damage. Again, next scan, and it's not as clear. Well, let's take this thing off to the northeast. Also, on this radar, we're able to really see what this Phil Campbell storm. And that was as it was going through Phil Campbell. And you can see that velocity couplet really maxes out over that area. It did EF5 damage to Hackleburg and Phil Campbell, and this thing will come more into radar range where it was a long tracker as well. So let's go ahead and pull up the next little spurt. There we go. And this is where the storm begins to recycle. And this cell will put down another intense tornado. This thing puts down an EF4. Let's get that storm relative velocity. And this is when it comes out of, okay, so this is the Phil Campbell storm. Let's take a look at this real quick because I want to go over this. And this is as it came out of Phil Campbell and headed off towards Hatton. And this thing was still producing EF5 damage at this point. There's a look at that velocity signature as it moves off towards Hillsborough. I believe it was producing EF5 and EF4 damage at this point as well. Very intense velocity couplet still associated with this thing. Again, you can see it's still very much there as it goes off towards Hillsborough. And this went off towards Trinity and Tanner. It was still producing high-end EF4 damage. This thing was a very, very massive tornado. We can try and see if we'll see it in 3D. I'm not quite sure if we will be able to, though. Not very evident right there. Yeah, still not very evident. So it's not really showing up on 3D, but you can see red TVS and that extreme hook echo, and there is that debris ball on reflectivity, that hooking echo as well. Pushes off to the northeast towards the Tanner area, and this thing is still on the ground after tracking over 100 miles. This moves off towards the Harvest area, still producing EF4 damage. There's that debris ball as it moves towards the Harvest area. You can see this thing was reported in downtown Harvest. There is that debris ball still with those strong velocity, with that strong velocity couplet. You see this thing is still on the ground. There's that debris ball on reflectivity. We put that there. They align perfectly. That is your tornado. Right here and right here. Again, still on the ground as it moves off towards Hazel Grove, or Hazel Green. And that is when it eventually lifts. But it does put down another tornado in Tennessee right here near Huntland. You can see that tornado was on the ground, and this is where that radar actually cuts out, and we can no longer see what's going on. And this radar would have been really helpful to have because there's multiple EF4s that touched down later that day in this radar hole. But let's take a look at that Coleman storm out there near Arab. So as this thing recycled, another intense tornado would go on to touch down near Scottsboro. You can see this area of convergence is beginning to come together. That's that inflow really, really ramping in. You can see this cell actually to the south is sucked in to the inflow and actually intensifies this thing. As we look, this is near Pigsaw. This is where it does EF4 damage, I believe, and in Flat Rock. Ooh, not what I meant to do. And you can see there it is. And with this next scan, completely intensifies and produces one of the nastier debris signatures of the day and the nastier velocity signatures. There's that tornado on reflectivity. You can see that debris ball and that debris being lofted right there. And here's that velocity couplet, very intense, just north of Pigsaw. And here we go. That velocity signature and that debris ball are still very much evident. You can see it continues off towards Flat Rock. Now, if I go back here and I try and get a gate-to-gate shear, let's just go ahead and Take that and that. So 192 knot delta velocity. That's 121 mile an hour over 99. So we're at over 200. So like around 210 a mile an hour gate to gate shear. As this thing moves off towards Flat Rock, you can see it's still very much intense. 197 knot delta velocity out here. So that's 137 on top of 89. So around the same, but very, very intense. And this thing moves off towards Trenton, still on the ground. You see that debris ball is still very much there as it crosses over into Georgia near Trenton. It continues to produce. And there's that debris ball still very much evident right there, and it aligns with that velocity as we continue to go over. And still very much on the ground as it goes through Chattanooga Valley. EF3 damage was located here. That thing was on the ground for a while. Unfortunately, this thing goes out, but you can see more rotation begin to develop near Ottawa. And this is where it cuts out, but this thing actually did produce an EF4 tornado north, I believe, in the city of Cleveland, Tennessee. This thing goes on to produce another EF4. It cuts out. Again, if we look out here towards the Stevenson area and the Bridgeport area, this thing, you can see there's that velocity, that last velocity we get. Rotation there, and there's that hook echo beginning to develop. Now, this thing actually did produce an EF4 as well in Bridgeport. But this thing cuts out right as we go and get to see what this thing produces. So it cuts out. So we're actually going to go ahead and take a look at the next batch we have. And this is going to be our storms out there in the Atlanta area. Or this is south of the Atlanta area. My bad. So this was the cells that track south of Birmingham in the afternoon, and these went on to produce some even more intense tornadoes, or not even more intense, but some more intense tornadoes in Georgia, central Georgia. So we see an EF1 tornado touches down right here. Let's get a storm melted velocity on this thing. And there we go. There's that tornado. And so this thing moved up towards Corinth, and there's your velocity right there. There's your velocity couplet. And it's hard to see on reflectivity, but there is a tornado there. So these cells really begin to mature as they push off to the north and east. That cell begins to, again, it looks like probably go over some trees or some homes. And there is our debris ball on reflectivity. You can see those purple values. That's debris being lofted by this tornado. And you can literally see the velocity and the debris ball. They very much align. Now this storm down here really begins to intensify once more. You can see that rotation intensifies, and an EF2 tornado does touch down here. That is our rotation, and that is our debris ball on radar. And so you can really see that presentation. Let's see. Path length of 7 miles, so we'll continue to go off. You can still see it's very much there. There's that velocity again. This tracked right on over I-185. And these storms began to really intensify. This northern cell did not do much, but this storm intensifies. And you see this storm to the south is beginning to intensify as well. You can see that mesocyclone really begins to develop out there south of Whitesville, Georgia. And that Beaver really becomes dominant, that strong updraft, that donut hole right here. And this thing, I believe, produces in the next scan out here near Hamilton, are the next 2 scans. Yeah, so this is where the tornado begins to touch down near Mountain Valley. And this thing, I believe, yeah, this thing was an EF2, but probably likely much stronger. And you can see that velocity intensifies right there. And here's where it's at its most intense, I believe, in its life stage as it moved up towards Warm Springs. So let's see. There's 157 knot delta velocity. So 72 mile an hour on top of 108. That's almost 200. That's almost 200 mile gate to gate shear. I believe that's around 180. So probably into the violent range, I would assume. Let's take a 3D on this thing, see if we can take a look at the tornado. I can't really see it, not very evident there. Next scan, though, there is your tornado. You can see it's this is depicting a wedge-shaped tornado right there. There it is. Boom, boom. And let's go ahead and take this back on over to the radar Yep, there we go. And this is still very much intense. Inflow is continuing to shoot into this thing. And it tracks off to the east over towards north of Manchester. Still very intense velocity couplet right there. This thing still very much has a debris ball on reflectivity as well. And that is where it begins to lift. Now, if I take you back on up, we had another intense tornado develop up here. And there is that hook echo, that classic hook echo on this. And, I mean, we saw this all too much during this day. East of Alvation, Georgia. And there is that velocity. Very, very intense right there. And you can just see that hooking shape to it. Again, there's that debris ball starting to pop up right there. You see, this thing was given an EF3, 140 mile an hour winds on this thing, given by the National Weather Service. And we can take a gate-to-gate shear on this thing. 134 mile an hour, or 134 knot delta velocity. That's 61 mile an hour on top of 92, so around 150 mile an hour gate-to-gate shear on this tornado. As this moved up towards Sunnyside, you can see that debris ball really, really deep, and that is your tornado. So actually, I'm going to see if I can see this thing on 3D. Why not? And there we are. There it actually is on 3D. So if we go ahead and outline that, there is our tornado touching down. Looks like a wedge shape via the 3D mode. Again, let's move on. You can see really as it goes over to Sunnyside. Just incredible. Let's take another 3D. And you can see right over Sunnyside. Huge tornado depicted on 3D. Looks like a wedge. And you can see that debris ball on reflectivity right there. We'll smooth that out. That is all your debris being lofted, that those purples, right as it goes over Sunnyside on US 19. Tracks off, and that is where it begins to lift. Now down here to the south, another intense tornado begins to develop out here near Barnesville, and this is let's go ahead and we have to pull up our. Here we go, and this is as it intensifies. And this is widely believed to be in the violent range. It just didn't hit much to get that rating, but this is widely believed to be an EF4, maybe even EF5 tornado as it went through Barnesville. Now, if we take a look at this two-panel look once again, so we can get that that dual look at it. If we take a place a marker, and get that storm relative velocity real quick. There we go. So you can see this thing really intensifies over Piedmont. This was 140 mile an hour EF3. This killed 2 people out there near Barnesville. And as it went right through Barnesville, you can see this velocity really intensifies. And there's your debris ball on radar. Another classic hook echo with the debris ball. And this, keep in mind, this was in the nighttime hours, so these things were not visible at all to the human eye unless there was lightning. Now, if we take a quick look, we're going to do a 3D and a gate-to-gate shear on this thing. So you can see around 176 knot delta velocity. That's 104 mile an hour on top of 199, so around 200 mile an hour delta velocity. That would be very indicative of a violent tornado. Now, if we take a look at this thing on 3D, and there we go. There is our tornado near Barnesville. This thing looks like a wedge on here. As it goes off again, see there again, it's extremely strong on that velocity. With the new velocity, let's take a look again. 171, 167, so 171 mile an hour delta velocity. That's 86 on top of 111. So that's well over 200 mile an hour. A gate-to-gate shear on this thing continues to track off towards Flavilla. You can see that thing is still deep as it goes off, and there's that velocity signature. There's a look at the last one, since I skipped over that a little quick. Still going off, and eventually, I mean, it's still a debris ball right there, but eventually this thing does lift, and then as we continue to track on, up here near Madison, another tornado touches down. I believe this one, a couple buildings were destroyed, and it touches down yet again, maybe? No, it doesn't. So that was it for the night on those eastern storms. Now, for the last look at the day, we're going to take you on over to these storms. So this right here, this is a look at one of our EF4s. Now here, it does not look like much, but when we take it to this scan right here, and this is all we have to look at for this one. When we take it to this scan right here, it's very, very hard to tell because it looks like a decently put together supercell, but nothing too impressive. This right here, right on the end of this, right there and right there, this was actually an EF4 tornado, a high-end EF4, almost nearing the EF5 range, and you wouldn't really believe it by looking at that, but again, there's the rotation. So that was a look at that. That was a high-end EF4. Now taking this off, we have another look at some strong tornadoes up here in Tennessee, and this thing was a widespread event. This thing was over multiple states. Again, as you saw in the beginning, this expanded up all the way up into New York. But here's a look at this up near Nuff. You can see a tornado touch down out here near Hot Springs. But this thing, as it goes off to the northeast, begins to really, really intensify. You can actually see this thing really develops right here. This is where that couplet intensifies. I believe this was an EF3. 5 fatal. It doesn't tell the rating, but this was a 5 fatality tornado. That is a really intense velocity couplet just south of Tuscaloosa. This was out in camping ground area, I believe. As we go off another scan, this thing continues to track off to the northeast. But with this last scan, I'll actually see if we can see anything on 3D. I doubt we will be able to. Yeah, nothing really visible on 3D, as I expected. Here's that couplet again as it tracked over State Route 351. And this thing actually recycled and produced an EF3 tornado, I believe, out here. Yeah, so there's a look at that. It really continues to intensify. There's our velocity couplet, and with this next scan, we get that tornado report, I believe. An EF2, 2 fatal. Yeah, this is a fatal EF2 with 120 mile an hour winds. As you go off, these storms are really not all too impressive. And that is a look at the event overview. At the end of the day, we had over 300 fatalities, unfortunately. Just an incredible, incredible weather event. And my heart goes out to all the families that suffered, all the homes lost, all the lives lost, anyone who lost a family member. My heart really goes out to them. This was a very historic day. And one last time, I will pull up the storm reports after looking at that. You can see these storms really, really tracked over a large, large area. And just a very historic day. And unfortunately, we will probably have a day like that day sometime in the next 20 years. And hopefully it's a long, long way away. We don't have to deal with something like this ever again. But this was the generational tornado outbreak, the super outbreak, 42711. And that was our complete overview and detailed analysis of this event. Consider giving me a like and a subscribe if you did enjoy this video. We do live severe weather coverage as well. We do in-depth coverage live whenever events are going on. Share this video with your friends if you did enjoy. Anyone who enjoys meteorology, I'm sure, will love this in-depth video, and I'm glad I could do it with you. This is the most in-depth one you'll find on YouTube. So consider sharing, liking, and subscribing. And thank you guys all for being here if you were here on the stream with us. And for those of you who are watching this on a video, I hope you enjoyed. And